Hello and welcome to a very special episode of the Buy, Sell, Hold Spotlight presented by Sports Car Market Magazine. I'm Darin Roberge. Before we begin, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Also be sure to join in the conversation and share your thoughts by leaving a comment below. Our guest today is SCM Contributor Jeff Trepel. Welcome, Jeff.
Thanks very much, Darin. It's great to be here.
For those who may not be familiar with you, why don't you give us a little bit of background?
Okay, well, I've been an auction analyst for Sports Car Market since 2015. And my brother also does that, and he's also the cartoonist for Sports Car Market. I can't claim that any of that talent, but sometimes it reflects on me, or people mistake me for him.
So when did you originally get into collector cars, and how long have you been doing this kind of outside of Sports Car Market overall?
Right. Well, I guess I've probably been pretty much a car enthusiast my whole life. My mom says that when I was like 2 or 3 years old, I would sit on the wall in front of our house waiting for our dad to come home from work, and I'd identify the cars. She said I couldn't pronounce any of them, like I'd say Bujic or something like that, but I could identify them. And then I guess I've owned probably 15 or so collector cars. I've never been in the collector car business exactly, but I've always been interested, and the opportunity to analyze auctions for Sports Car Market's been great because I love auctions, and I love Amelia Island.
And you will be on the ground at Amelia Island reporting for Sports Car Market. So let's kind of get into it here. Amelia Island 2023. As we just saw, we came back from Arizona, we came back from Ruxmobile. I would say both pretty successful weeks. What do you think that speaks to in regard to where the market is right now?
Right. Well, of course, we have all this speculation about a possible recession and so forth, but so far I don't see it really impacting the market. There have been a few sales where they've been maybe a little higher than expected number of no sales, which I think might relate to some sellers being a little too convinced of the preciousness of their cars. But overall, I see maybe a leveling off of the market. But I don't see a significant decline.
So no decline necessarily on the horizon for you, but there's got to be some concern someplace. We know that Hagerty just downgraded the market slightly, but it's still an incredibly hot market, probably the hottest it's been in the last 5 or 6 years at least. If you kind of count out the pandemic area and that type of thing. But what specifically, where in the marketplace, what segments are you starting to see things that are concerning you?
I do feel like in the high end cars, over $1 million, let's say, that compared to the pandemic market, say of a couple of years ago, that buyers now are not quite willing to pay whatever it takes to get the car. They'll make good bids, but the sky is not the limit. I think the limits come down a bit. And maybe an example would be in the Broad Arrow Jim Taylor auction. There was one car in that auction that had a reserve, which was the D-type Jaguar. And from memory, the estimate on that car was 9 to 10 million. And those are pretty hard cars to value. It depends a lot on the racing history and so forth. And I think the high bid was $7,250,000, which to my mind was a pretty healthy bid. Now, I can understand why it wasn't accepted. I thought it was a pretty healthy bid, but I think buyers just we're hesitant to get into that 8-figure area.
It's a heavy car, very significant, certainly. So where do you think the money that normally is pointed in that direction is currently residing right now? Well, I don't know about that money exactly, that type of money. But of course, people can now get pretty good interest on their money in the last couple of months or last few months. I just think that buyers are being a little bit more, I guess I'd use the word cautious. I don't see them, willing to be almost overpay for most cars. And there may be even a few exceptions to that. I still think they are willing to overpay for some Porsches, for example. Yeah, there's always going to be cars that I think people are going to swing for the fences on. I think there's a couple in Amelia that we'll talk about in a little bit. But you mentioned interest rates. How do you think the interest rates are affecting the marketplace overall? I mean, I know this is generally sort of a cash type of environment, but there are certainly outlets out there that are
financing related. Broad Arrow Group certainly has launched Broad Arrow Capital recently, which is an example of that. How are those companies being affected by that? And what's the overall picture for the market in regard to the impact of interest rates?
Well, I wouldn't say that I'm an expert on that, but on the financing. And I think, if you're buying collector cars, you should pretty much pay cash, be my opinion. But I do think that, money has been so cheap for so long, with such, near zero or a couple of percent or 3 or 4% interest rates, that I think people look now and they may say, I don't really want to pay 6% or 7% or whatever it is, to buy a collector car, which is something that no one absolutely has to have. So, I think there could be a tamping down effect, but I don't really see that as having a major effect because, as you said earlier, I think it's mostly a cash market, but it could be having a marginal effect on the edges.
Certainly. So moving on towards the event itself, Hagerty's influence. They have gone full bore on Amelia Island, obviously changed some things around, purchased some stuff, so on and so forth. The Concours d'Elegance is now the Amelia. What do you think is going to be different moving forward now that Hagerty is sort of in control?
Well, obviously they bought Broad Arrow in one form or another. And, so now there are 4 auctions instead of 3, although some years there have been some marginal players and there were 4 auctions, but in terms of big players, we now have 4 big players instead of 3. And I think that means the totals will go up. Overall, I think it probably increases Amelia's importance on the auctions.
Unfortunately, our days of having an extra event in Amelia Island are short-lived and will be coming to an end soon, as Sotheby's has recently announced that this year's Amelia installment will be their last. What do you think the effect of that is going to be, not only this year on totals, but moving forward without Sotheby's?
Well, I think this year, all 4 auction houses have very strong catalogs. I mean, they're really just excellent. Now, Gurney has expanded to be a 2-day sale, and they may anticipate doing that in the future. So that might partially compensate for RM not being there. I do think RM Sotheby's catalog this year is the best of the best. They're all excellent, but I think theirs is the very best. And I definitely think that they will be missed. I imagine the other houses will try to increase size of their catalogs to compensate. Now, you can only auction so many cars in one day and in one auction, but as Gooding illustrates, by expanding to 2 days, I think we potentially could see that from Broad Arrow and even Bonhams in the future.
Let's get right to it. Let's start with the collections. Over at RM Sotheby's, we have the Terrence Adderley collection. It's got a little bit of everything in it. Some 80s stuff. There's a race car, some pre-war, some mid-century sports cars. They also have the Ionelli family collection. Sorry if I said that wrong. A little bit of everything in that one. There's a Dino, some Porsches, some mid-century American luxury cars. They also have a private collection, which has some incredibly desirable things from the pre-war era, including V16 Cadillacs, Mercedes, Bentley, Rolls, Duesenbergs, and then there's a random 250 GTE Ferrari thrown in the mix as well. Over at Bonhams, a fascinating collection of lost Jaguars, rare and competition Jags. Many of them have been out of the public eye since the mid-1970s. So if you're a fan of British cars, particularly Jaguar, you're going to have a really good time browsing through those. Over at Gooding & Company, they have a fabulous collection of roof Porsches, several significant examples involved in that one. And then finally, Gooding & Company has the Schlegel motorcycle collection, which may be my favorite thing in Amelia Island. We'll touch on that a little bit later. Some fabulous stuff in that. Mostly blue chip Italian bikes, that type of thing there. And then Broad Arrow Group has a trio of McLaren carbon fiber cars that will certainly get supercar fans excited. So moving on to individual market segments. Jeff, what do you think going into Amelia Island is going to be the hot segment this year?
Well, this is probably not an imaginative response, but just going on prior years in Amelia, Porsches are just extremely strong at Amelia and have been, I think, because of the Porsche Works reunion is held at Amelia on the same weekend. And so you just have a lot of buyers, potential bidders and buyers there, and a lot of excitement about Porsches. If you walk around Fernandina Beach, in the evenings, it almost looks like, the three most popular cars are Toyota, Honda, and Porsche. And just on the street, it's really remarkable. So I think Porsches will continue to be very strong, and they have a very good, excellent, all the houses have an excellent lineup of Porsches. And Gooding has always had that. And this year, as you mentioned, they have the roof collection, which is really outstanding. It's generally a post-war European sports car is the stock and trade at Amelia. Now, there's lots of other cars. There's pre-war cars. There's English cars. There's muscle cars. Now there's some Japanese cars. Not too many Corvettes usually. But I think post-war European sports cars remain, this is still the place to go for those, along with Pebble Beach, of course.
Yeah, Porsche is very, very hot every year in Amelia, but this year the real star cars are Ferrari. Let's get to Ferrari. Two Ferrari Californias on offer this time around. The 1962 250 GT short wheelbase California Spider at Gurney Company. Estimate on that one is 18 to 20 million. One of only 37 covered headlight short wheelbase California Spiders. It is the sole example delivered in a spectacular blue color, built for the 1962 New York Auto Show, with factory equipped, unique features galore. Very, very, very desirable car. It was a fixture in two significant Ferrari collections since the early 1970s. It's been awarded everywhere. Cavallino Classic, Ferrari Classic K certified. It retains its original chassis, body, and driveline. And then over at RM Sotheby's, we've got a 1959 250 GT long wheelbase California Spider. Estimate on that one's a little lower, 9 to 11 million. It is the rarest and arguably the most comfortable version of the covered headlight California Spider, especially if you're a taller driver. Very, very elegant car. Factory equipped the competition engine. It's Class K certified, retains its numbers matching engine, gearbox, rear axle. It's been maintained fastidiously since the 2012 restoration that was done by Mark experts. It's been awarded all over the place. You name it, it's been there. Quail, Cavallino, et cetera, et cetera. It's documented with original factory records, former owners' correspondence, magazine art, photo, service, restoration invoices, and it's accompanied by its manuals and complete toolkit. And the story behind the car is fascinating. If you go to RM Sotheby's website on that one, the question remains, obviously, these are incredibly desirable, fabulous, fabulous, fabulous cars. We have not seen two Californias come to market since probably 2016. We did have one in Monterey, a long wheelbase car at RM Sotheby's that I personally felt underperformed a little bit. The question remains is A, why are these two cars coming onto the market at the same time? And B, can the market support two cars that are this large in one series of events?
Well, we have seen some no sales in very high level Ferraris, recently. And I do think that there's a risk of that kind of going back to what I said earlier about, I think high level buyers are getting a little cautious about paying whatever it takes. And the short wheelbase car, at Gooding in particular has the very, very highest. However, these are both fabulously desirable cars for high level collectors. And I'm sure there's some very high level collectors who may have a short wheelbase and they want to get a long wheelbase to complement it, and vice versa. So I do think there is potential for both of them to sell. It may draw more of those bidders in that there are two, because they have twice as much possibility as, of getting them. So, I guess the short wheelbase is generally, to an extent, considered a little more desirable than the long wheelbase, as reflected by the estimates here. But it's really hard to find any negatives on either of these cars. By the way, on the long wheelbase, one of my favorite facts about it is it said in the description that the first owner was an 18-year-old who got it new, which is completely insane. And he owned it in suburban New York, and he must have had some encounters with the law, because he only had it for a year. His dad probably made him get a VW Beetle after that. But I think there is potential for both of them to sell, but there's always risk with these very high level cars that people are just going to say that it's beyond my limit price.
I got to tell you that car that Gurney has though is enormously special. One of one color, New York Auto Show car. Like, I mean, every California is special, obviously, but this one just does so many other things on top of that.
The color really is the icing on the cake on that car. It really is fabulous. And the color on the long wheelbase is great too, but the short wheelbase color really kind of tops it off.
Yeah, both excellent examples for sure. Another vehicle from Ferrari during that era that we've kind of seen come to market a lot lately, very rare car, 1966 Ferrari 500 Superfast Series 2 over at Bonhams. This is the display car that they had for Amelia over at their Scottsdale auction. Beautiful car, silver. It's original Chinetti U.S. delivery, left-hand drive example. 14,000 miles from new, one of 12 in the more desirable 5-speed Series 2 examples. It's a matching numbers car. It's got the Marcel Massini history report to it. We've seen a lot of Series 2 Superfast, despite the low production numbers, coming to auction lately. They seem to be doing okay numbers, but the estimate to this one, which is 1 to 2 million, seems really conservative to me. There's two sides to this coin that I'm struggling with here. Number one, obviously a lot of them come to market. There's only so many buyers for these cars. It's not a car that somebody walks in off the street and just decides that they want one day. You have to kind of know what you're doing to get one of these. Number two, the fact that there are so many of these that have been to market lately says to me that there probably aren't going to be very more coming to market in the near future. So we may be looking at not seeing these for several more years. What do you think that's going to do to the values on these?
Well, Gooding also has one, and it's also a Series 2 500 Superfast, and it's dark green. It really looks excellent in dark green. If you look in this description, it says at the end that it's only been driven 200 miles in, I don't remember the exact number of years, but something like 12 or something like that. And it says it would benefit from a thorough going through, and that it's probably maybe in less than top level condition. Now, if you can get it at the right price, it's still a very rare and desirable Ferrari and still worth buying. But I think that accounts for why the estimate is half of, well, the high estimate on this car is the low estimate on the Gooding car. And the Gooding car looks more like a turnkey, situation. And, I'm not sure there are too many more left to come to market. So, maybe there'll still be a trickle. I don't know. So I found a couple of, later Ferraris that I thought were really, well worth attention. And that is, I believe there are 3 F40s in the entire weekend. The one that caught my eye the most was Bonhams. It has an estimate of 2,900,000 to 3,400,000. These have been, extremely strong, these cars in recent times. Occasionally they'll be in no sale, but they've been very, very strong. And, this car, the best quote I thought from the description of it was, it said that this car had a degree of maintenance usually reserved for jet aircraft. And it did look like every time it went to or came back from a show, Cavallino or Pebble Beach or wherever, or a track day, it got it went in for service before and after every time. And, I think it's extremely desirable F40, as are the other ones. I believe, I don't quite remember the mileage on each of them, but I believe this one had the lowest mileage. And, so I would watch, I'd watch F40s. I think it'll be interesting to see what happens to them. And then, RM has a, 288 GTO, which of course they made a lot fewer 288 GTOs, than F40s. I think people tend to think of the F40 as maybe the more extreme and then thus maybe more desirable car. But I think they only made about 275 288 GTOs while they made about 1,300 F40s. So the GTO is a lot more rare, and its estimate, the RM car is, 4 million to 5 million. And it was an original U.S. delivery car, which is very rare on a 288 GTO because initially they had to be federalized. And, it had, I don't remember the exact mileage, but it was under 5,000 miles. And so it sort of looked like the fabulous 288 GTO equivalent of the, F40. So I think it'll be interesting to see if those two can achieve their, as well as the other F40s, can achieve their estimates.
That is really, truly a fabulous example. It's got the red seat inserts on it as well.
Yeah.
And, you think about kind of the history of that car. It was a Group E car. Originally, they never made it. So they're just like, screw it. Let's put it on the street and let's let people go crazy with it. So,
right.
And I'll tell you, we talked about this with Brad when he was on the show a couple weeks ago. The 288 GTOs are taking off like a rocket in the market. It wasn't that long ago that they were $500,000, then $1 million, then $2 million. Now here they are, $3-4 million.
Right.
So, the sky's the limit on those, and I don't think those cars are done yet. So, if somebody's looking to jump in and try to make some money, that's probably a good example to do that.
Right.
Another car that we've seen that's taken off like a rocket lately is 246 Dinos. And there are a couple of those for sale in Amelia this year. But one car that really grabbed me over at Sotheby's, 1968 Ferrari Dino 206 GT. It's got an estimate of 7 to 825 on it. Believed to be the 18th of 153 206s produced. Certified for Ferrari Classic K with a red book. Contour Quality 3 restoration performed by Dino Restoration in California. It's been shown at Palm Beach Cavallino Classic, Concorso Italiano. It's basically been everywhere. It's a fabulous color combination of a gray color with amazing blue interior on it. And it's accompanied by a report from Marcel Mussini, of course, as well as a two-roll, the owner's manual, parts book, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We've seen the 246s start to eclipse in certain situations Daytonas and become really a valuable car from that era. But the 206 is a more special version of that. Why is that exactly for a slower car? What can people expect to get from an experience of a 206 versus a 246? Why would you rather have this per se than a 246, or why wouldn't you rather have this per se versus a 246?
It does seem rather odd that the lower powered cars has a high estimate here, which is maybe almost double what a good 246 GT estimate would be. Well, first of all, there's rarity since only 153 of the 206s were built. So you have that to start with. I guess the 206 is lighter, so maybe that compensates for the smaller and less powerful engine. Still, to me, it sort of seems like, to bring it down to middle class terms, I'd rather have a 283 Impala than the 327. It still seems a little odd to me that the 206 seem, at least at for this level of car, which is it's a very beautiful car. It still seems a little odd to me. I think I'd still rather have the 246. But if you want distinction and you want something that almost nobody else has, 206 is the way to go. And the blue seat inserts are worth probably $50,000 by themselves. They look, just looking in the catalog, they look like terry cloth, and they're very interesting. I think I would still personally prefer 246, but I can understand from a rarity and purity point of view that someone might go for the 206.
Yeah, there's something to be said for the original for sure.
Yeah.
Moving on to some other selections from Italian cars. There is a mountain of wonderful stuff from Alfa Romeo. There's some off Lamborghinis that are really cool. Incredible Maseratis, but I have to pick an Alfa. That's always going to be my favorite just about. And my favorite sort of off Italian brand, if you want to call it that. 1955 Alfa Romeo 1900C SSZ. Estimate on this is 1.5 to 2 million. Arguably the ultimate Alfa Romeo of the mid-century era with only 39 examples produced. It's got a period racing history, which is amazing, including the Mille Miglia. It retains its original Tipo 1308 engine with Zagato coachwork, and it's been exquisitely restored by Motion Products, which we all know is one of the top restoration houses in the world. They pretty much don't do anything that's not perfect. And it's been displayed at Pebble Beach, Cavallino, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it comes with extensive documentation, owner's manual, toolkit, and jack. I mean, what else do you say on this car? The color is phenomenal. The presentation is great. The history is amazing. The estimate is high on this for sure, but I kind of think it gets there. What are your thoughts on this car?
Well, the Zagato body is what accounts for the and its rarity accounts for the very high estimate on this car. There's some other 1900Cs in the various auctions that are, I'm generalizing, but around maybe $300,000 to $400,000 estimates. And they're beautiful too, but they're have the more typical bodies that you see. And the Zagato body is tremendously distinctive. And I think the green interior, as you said, is really spectacular also. Whether that's the difference is going to be able to achieve this estimate, we'll have to see.
Yeah, it's an astonishing car. It's absolutely gorgeous on every level. But again, there's a lot of really good Italian cars out there this time.
Right. So if you want a 1900C, you can buy one for about a fourth of that price, or less maybe. But if you want one with a Zagato body, you're gonna have to pay much more. Okay. So I'd like to give a little shout out to one of the very cheapest cars in the Gooding auction. We've been talking about cars that range from like $800,000 to $20 million. So I'd like to go totally in the other direction and talk about Gooding's 64 Lancia Flavia, 1.8 Pininfarina coupe. It has an estimate. It's a no reserve car, and it has an estimate of $35,000 to $45,000, which by Amelia standards is virtually free. And I think this is a real jewel of a car. I think they're brilliantly engineered. The styling is excellent. It looks a lot like a Ferrari 250 GTE. Same designer in the same period, of course. The colors on this one are a little bit boring. It's white with a black interior. The description says charming patina. Looks pretty nice to me in the photos, but of course you have to see it in person. But I think this could be a great collector car that someone could just buy it and drive it for fun. They don't have to do an expensive restoration. And, I looked at the Pagani Zonda, which had a multi-million dollar estimate. I thought, well, let's look at something that costs little. So compared to some of these chain cars, it's just barely pocket change.
That's a fabulous little car, no doubt. And those things check a ton of boxes. And again, like you said, there's so many things in common with that car with a far more expensive Ferrari that it's really a bargain there. And candidly, I love an original car. So the patina for me is a big plus.
Right.
Moving on to Corvettes, generally not super well represented in Amelia Island, but there's one in particular I think is pretty interesting. But first, we did see a couple of really significant C3 Corvettes across the block in Arizona, and they did what they were supposed to there. Do you see that C3 numbers overall are going to continue to rise? Is it finally time for the C3 Corvette?
Well, in Amelia, I think the answer is no, despite the excellent race car that Bonhams has. But and Amelia typically, as you said, has not really been a center of Corvette action, but there have been a few that have been significant. I think your average day-to-day C3s are not going to make too much impact at auction. I do think there is some potential of, of course, the L88 cars and so forth are a huge exception. And they're always going to be very valuable, and they'll be prominent at the auctions. I think they work a little better in Arizona, or maybe at Mecum Kissimmee or somewhere like that, or barrett-jackson auction. But I do think there's potential for that. I think there's some potential for the earlier chrome bumper C3s, say up to 72 or so, to filter in some if they're in excellent condition. They have the right equipment, right colors, and so forth. Overall, I don't think your average day-to-day C3 that you see on the street being driven for fun is really going to make much impact on the auctions. That's
what C3s are really for. They're supposed to be fun. So, and certainly a fun example, as you mentioned, at Bonhams, 1968 Chevrolet Corvette L88 convertible, hardtop Sunray DX Racer. Estimate on that one is $400,000 to $600,000. 427 overhead V8 single Holley 4-barrel carb, approximately 550 horsepower, which is a lot of fun in a car like that, I'm sure. 4-speed M22 rock crusher manual transmission, 4-wheel independent suspension, and 4-wheel disc brakes. Originally prepared and raced by Don Yanko. That's pretty cool right there. It was a 1968 24 hours of Daytona 4th in class and Sebring 12-hour GT class record holder. And been driven by some significant racers, and it's meticulously documented. We've seen race cars and competition cars do really well in Amelia. What is your impression of this? Where does this fit into the mix?
I think this is a really outstanding and important Corvette race car. Of course, racing cars obviously have a smaller pool of potential buyers who can use them. Much smaller. But I think there'll be a lot of enthusiasm for this car. You never know about race cars, but I think I think it's a really outstanding consignment. Driven by Peter Revson and Pedro Rodriguez. And I believe it's the only Corvette ever driven by Pedro Rodriguez. And, I feel like this car is, as you said, I think it's likely to do quite well. I can even imagine it going over the S. I think it depends kind of on, who's in the room or on their laptop on that day. But I think there's potential for this car to do, extremely well. I think it's an important racer that I was not even aware of before.
Well, competition cars generally do pretty well in Amelia Island, but Amelia is more known for European competition cars.
Yeah.
This year seems to be an exception. Lots of pretty cool American race cars. Another example that we have is 1966 All-American Racers Gurney Eagle Mark I, Gooding and Company, estimate $3 to $4 million on that one. This is an important car right here. Very first Eagle built by Dan Gurney's All-American Racers. One of just 4 Formula One Eagles built, driven by Dan Gurney, Bob Bonner on Phil Hill. I mean, come on. It's got a 2.7 liter engine, but it's accompanied by the original, and it's spent 38 years as part of a pretty significant collection, the Donington Grand Prix collection. Easily among one of the most significant American racing cars ever built. I mean, like, what box does this not check? And if you think about the history of the United States and their offerings in Formula One, it's kind of been a while. There kind of haven't been that many, and this was the kind of the first one through the door. Like, does it get more significant than this?
Well, it's obviously another very important race car. I think at that level, there should be several potential buyers. Again, think the question is, this may sound a little repetitive, but I think the question is, are people willing to pay what it takes to get that car? But it's obviously very highly desirable and a significant car. I mean, the U.S. really hasn't, now we have Haas, but the U.S. generally hasn't been a major participant in Formula One. So here's an example of ownership and piloted by Americans. So I think it's a very significant car. Again, there's a lot fewer people who can use it.
And that remains the question with these vintage Formula One cars is, I've driven them, but I've driven them from like one parking lot to another, and that was kind of enough for me. So the question remains is, what do you do with something like this?
Well, I think you have to, you either have to be an outfit that can support it and rent it out to drivers essentially, or you have to be someone who maybe has a staff, to prep the car, because, I don't think the average hobbyist is going to be, playing with the fuel and transaxle on this car, or changing the spark plugs. So
yeah, pretty serious undertaking,
yes.
Certainly.
You have to be very committed to own something like this. One that, in a totally different, area of racing that I thought was interesting is, Bonhams has I believe it's a 92 Nissan Skyline, GTR, which, with an estimate of 375 to 475,000. Apparently this is the car that got the, Godzilla nickname for, Skylines. And, this was apparently the very last one built for racing. Now, it mainly raced in Group A and in Japanese touring car racing. So it was mainly racing in Japan and Australia. So it's maybe not that well known, or definitely not that well known to Americans. But it was very prominent in Japan and Australia. And to some extent, these cars in general were somewhat better known in Europe. This one is a very well preserved and very original car, and it's as race condition with the original engine. Something you don't see with races of this level all the time. And I think this is another car with maybe a somewhat narrow audience, but I think that there may be people in that narrow audience who are very enthusiastic about it, and I think it could well draw a high bid.
Yeah, we've talked about the influence of video games a lot on this show recently, and I think this car kind of checks the box. Obviously, the R34 is maybe the more notable from that sort of general perspective, but the reality of the situation is that the 32 is a better car to do things like this in. It's lighter, it's a little bit more tossable. So I think if somebody wants to live out their Gran Turismo fantasies, this is a pretty good place to start.
I agree. I think this could be almost sort of a market maker type of car.
Moving on to Porsche. Obviously, we know that Amelia is really the hotbed for the German marque, and this year should be no exception. Lots of really good cars for sale in Amelia in 2023 from Porsche. So let's start right at the top here. 1996 Porsche 911 Carrera RS over at Broad Arrow Group. They've got an estimate on this one of $325 to $400. This is why I like this car. This is a well-preserved Japanese market example. So you can go to all the JDM meets and you can freak out everybody with your German car at the JDM meets. Right. 43,000 or 45,000 original miles just over at the time of cataloging. It's equipped with a Club Sport aerodynamic package as well as optional air conditioning, electric windows, which is a nice feature to have on that. Finished in speed yellow over black with the partial leather interior. This is, for many, I think probably the ultimate road-going naturally aspirated air-cooled 993. For me, it certainly is. It's very rare, too. One of, just over 1,014 examples produced between 95 and 96. I love this car. I love a naturally aspirated Porsche. Obviously, the turbos are incredibly exhilarating in those cars, but there's something about a naturally aspirated, just kind of plain Jane 993. And this is sort of that, but dressed up in all the right ways. What do you think the future holds for one of these?
Well, I think you identified that, the distinction this car has is that it's got, the Club Sport package, and the fact that it's Japanese spec, et cetera, distinguishes it from lots of other 911s that are 993 Air and 911s that are at these auctions. And while one might question, even with Porsche Works Reunion, are there enough buyers who want to pay a lot for the large number of various 911s in these auctions? I think we've seen in the past that the answer usually is yes. Could be a no sale here and there, but for the most part, I think the answer is usually yes. The high estimate on this seems fairly aggressive to me, but I'm usually amazed at how well these distinctive 911s sell.
Yeah, there seems to be no ceiling on the 993s.
Yeah. I have a very different Porsche to raise. I almost put this in the racer category, but I thought I'd put it in the Porsche category. And that is, Broad Arrow has a 907K, racer, which I think is one of the most significant cars at all four of these auctions. And, it has an estimate of 4.5 million to 5.5 million. It was the winner of the 68 Targa Florio. So that's, you can't really do better than that unless it won Le Mans or something. But yeah, the winner at the 68 Targa Florio really didn't have that extensive a race history otherwise, but it had some several, first places. And I believe that the Targa Florio was driven by Vic Elford. It's a 2-time Amelia class winner. So it's got great credentials. Rarely do you see a 907 come to market. I barely can remember any. I haven't checked to see when the last one was, but, I think this is a very significant car. It could certainly be, the pinnacle of any great Porsche collection.
Yeah, no doubt about that. It's certainly iconic. Maybe a little bit on the other side of that, not so iconic. And here we go. This is my favorite modern Porsche. I will say this again with confidence. This is my favorite modern Porsche. 2000 Porsche Boxster S 986. Estimate from RM Sotheby's $20,000 to $25,000. This one is really special. It's extensively well-optioned example, finished in the violet metallic paint, which isn't for some people, but it's really desirable for others. I love it. I think it's great. It's got a black full leather interior with the dark burl maple trim. one of the big issues that people have always had about the Boxers is they felt that the interiors were a little bit underappointed. This fixes that problem. It also has the Aero kit with the 18-inch turbo look alloy wheels and a hardtop. Benefits from single family ownership since new. It's serviced with all the invoices, and it has just 4,500 original miles. Okay. I love Boxers. I think that they are a car that Porsche got right on the first generation, and they haven't been as good since. I love the sound of the engine. I love the way that it whines. I love the way that the front suspension buckles when you hit it just quite right. I love that little clunk that the 6-speed transmission, which this car's equipped with, has. These are fabulous cars, and you can pretty much give me any Porsche from, the early to mid 90s all the way through. This is the car I'm going to take. This is the year I'm going to take, and this is pretty much the equipment I'm going to take. They made a lot is the issue. So that's the question for the collector car market. But do you see that Boxsters are ever going to be really collectible cars?
Well, I think, there are many levels of collectible cars. I mean, I think early Miatas are collectible cars, and they made huge number of those, but the really great ones that are left, that are in excellent condition, are, at a lower level, are certainly collectible cars. Yes, I think Boxsters will be collectible cars. I think, and by the way, I think the estimate on this is way too low, and that it will easily exceed the estimate, and I'll buy you lunch if it doesn't. Now, this one has a lot going for it, as you mentioned. It has the violet paint. There's millions, it seems like, silver and black Boxsters out there, and which, seem kind of boring, but this has the very distinctive paint. And while, again, as you said, for everybody, the people that love it will really love it. And, extremely low mileage, single family ownership, service records and so forth. It basically has everything for a Boxster. Obviously it's never going to be a Carrera GT because it costs a tiny fraction of the price. But I do think that higher level Boxsters in unusual colors, with the right equipment will be, and really already are to some extent, collector cars.
So what do you think factors in with the IMS bearing in that issue? Will that keep the values low, or will that take enough of these off of the streets to where they become more desirable?
Well, I think for people that are going to buy them for transportation, they're going to want to know that either the IMS bearing has been done, and it may suppress the values a little bit. I think this car, I doubt anyone's going to buy this car and drive it to work every day. I think they'd still like to know if the IMS bearing is being done, but if it hasn't, I don't think that the mileage may be too low for it to have been done. But if it hasn't, I don't think that's going to impact this car very much. But, if I was out saying, I think I'll go buy a used Boxster, it would certainly impact my decision of which car to buy. A Porsche far different than the ones we've talked about, which is, Broad Arrow has a 53 356 Pre-A coupe. 200, the estimate's 200 to 240,000. It has a 2017 restoration. It's not the original engine. It has a 1600 engine instead of a 1500. It's not the original color, but it's correct Porsche color, white, with the red interior. Correct Porsche white for the year. And, I think these very early Porsches, say pre-55, pre-Speedster maybe, are extremely interesting. And, it's just very fascinating to look at the bloodlines of them and so forth. And I think this is a car that I could see this potentially exceeding its high estimate also. I think it's I just think these are fascinating to examine closely. The pre-55 Porsches, and I'm interested to see how this one does.
There's certainly something to be said for minimalism too, and those cars are just made of nothing basically, which I think makes them better in a lot of ways than some of the later examples of the 356. So that's a fabulous car. It's gonna be real interesting to see what that one does for sure. Moving on to Mercedes-Benz. As of late, certainly, it would not be a Florida auction without something like this present in it. And Broad Arrow Group's got a great one, 1987 Mercedes-Benz AMG Hammer sedan. The estimate on this one, 575 to 625, supported by the original AMG build sheet. It is believed to be one of only 13 AMG Hammers in North America. It's got all the service records from 2021, $79,000 service there. It's featuring an M117 6-liter V8 with an AMG designed cylinder heads, 4 valves per cylinder, producing nearly 400 horsepower. Here's the thing I love about this car. This thing looks like a brick going down the road. It'll do 181 miles an hour, and it's faster than a Ferrari Testarossa. These things have been setting the internet on fire lately. Every time one of them sells, people are just blown away by how much they're going for. I think there's a strong possibility. This may have too many doors. We'll see. But I think there's a strong possibility that this beats the estimate. What is your take on the AMG Hammer craze as of late?
Well, they did incredibly well at the Miami auction. And we'll be looking at this car closely in Amelia. I am constantly amazed by how the prices that these bring. And I look at it and I go, well, I like it. And I think it's pretty cool, but do I like it $600,000 worth? I'm not so sure. But obviously there are people that do. It wouldn't surprise me if this car makes its estimate, even though I look at it and I go, wow. But it is a fabulous car. It's maybe not that fabulous to look at. But I think it's probably quite fabulous to own.
It seems that these cars are sort of kind of quietly, I guess if you want to call it quietly, depends on the circles you run in, becoming sort of the benchmark for 80s collectability right now. These are worth as much as, or more than lots of really important cars from Ferrari, Lamborghini, et cetera at this point. Is this a craze, or do they keep going, or what do we think is going to happen with these?
Well, there's, in a way, certainly you mentioned this one, there's only 13 North American examples. So they're far more rare. And, some of the Ferraris and Lamborghinis from the 80s weren't exactly the highest quality cars ever built. And this may be more comfortable, better quality, just as fast, if not faster, and much more rare. So I can understand people being very enthusiastic about these. Again, it's not that thrilling to look at, but I think maybe in every other way, it probably is a thrill.
There's something to be said for build quality on these, because these are stout cars in that regard. You close the door on these things, it's like shutting the bank vault safe or something. And all the little switches and all that stuff, they make wonderful little noises that, if you do it too often with some of the Italian cars from the area, for example, they just fall off and springs shoot out of them.
Right.
So these are pretty well built cars that are fast and then they do a lot of stuff.
Yeah, I think it'll be one of the most interesting cars at the have all four of the auctions to look at. Yeah. So I have a Mercedes from a different era that I'm interested in, which is RM's 67 250 SL Pagoda. With importantly, and this is what makes it interesting. There's lots of Pagodas around. This one has the ZF 5-speed transmission. Once in a while, you'll see a 280 SL, with a 5-speed. But I've owned two 250 SLs and one 230 SL in the past. And I've never seen a 5-speed 250 SL to my knowledge. And the catalog says that less than 2% of all Pagodas were equipped with 5 speeds. So there's extreme rarity at play here. And also, if you've ever owned one of these with 4-speed or with the automatic, but the ones I've owned have been 4-speed manuals, they're great cars. I love them. I love to drive them. I think the handling is spectacular for the vintage. They're comfortable and they're well built. But their one flaw or negative to me is they're very undergeared. And, you're driving on the interstate at 70 miles an hour and you feel like you're torturing the engine. And maybe the engine could take it, but the driver can't, and, I think the additional, gear is extremely important on these. This car has also got great colors. It's anthracite with the red interior is really, really nice looking. And, it got a great restoration. I believe it was from 2017, if I recall correctly. And, it's been retrofitted with the original type, Coolmeister air conditioning. And I think it's just really an outstanding, outstanding Pagoda that might actually bring between 200 and 250,000. And that's a very strong price for a 250 SO.
We've really seen those cars blow up price-wise over the last couple of years. I mean, I remember a time where, $100,000 for a 280 with a 4-speed was sort of out of control. But, that transmission is really important in that car. I mean, you can kind of get away with having an automatic or whatnot. Actually, I prefer the automatic probably in the 280. But when we're talking the smaller engine cars, you really, really need a manual transmission. And if you've got that extra gear on the freeway, it really makes a big difference.
Yep, it sure does.
Moving on to British cars. I'm going in a little different direction on this, but the reality is I feel like this might be the ultimate off-roader and quite possibly the ultimate Land Rover. 1997 Land Rover NAS Defender 90. It's a Gurney Company, $80,000 to $110,000. It's a coveted and very rare final year NAS example. 4-liter V8 engine. It's got the electronic ZF transmission, single owner, and all the maintenance is new. It's got a wide variety of upgrades, including a hardtop and a lift. The thing looks fabulous. I highly recommend you go to GurneyCompany.com and go through all the pictures there. All the service records are included. It's got a Carfax. This thing is killer. I am a big fan of off-road vehicles, and I think this is about as good as you're going to find anywhere on any Land Rover. Is there anything out there that's better than this?
Well, I've seen Broncos, high-level Broncos, nice Broncos sell for around the high estimate of this car. And I've actually find this estimate to be very reasonable. I felt like in this, sometimes there's some random selection of cars, but I felt like this year seemed to be fewer high-level Land Rovers and Toyota Land Cruisers and Broncos and so forth in the auction than there have been in the recent years. And I can't really say why that is. But this one stood out as probably the best example of a 4x4, which I think is what you were saying in the auctions. There were a couple of the Mercedes G-Wagons. I think I'd rather have this.
Oh yeah, without a doubt. And I mean, I think if you think about it too, we watched the FJ market go up real high and then go down real quick, and that may have had some reflection on this. And the Bronco market is having a moment at certain auction houses in other places as well. I kind of think that this is not there yet, and I think this is going to be a real solid buy for somebody if they can get it.
I agree. If it sells in this range, I think it's a good deal. I used to own an FJ40, and so I watched, and I had it for about 7 years, and I watched that market, and it would go up and down and up and down, and it seemed very unpredictable. And I don't know if that's going to happen to these Land Rovers too.
They seem like they could potentially be a little bit more stable.
Possibly. Right. There were a lot more FJ40s. There are far more Toyotas than there are Land Rovers. And their conditions are very, very good. And here, I think their conditions are going to probably tend more toward the median. My British car is in a totally different area, and it's kind of maybe a little bit of an oddball. And that's Braun Arrow's 52 Daimler DB18 drop head coupe by Hooper. It has an estimate of 125 to 175,000. I saw this car at Hershey. I just kind of came around the corner, and it appeared to me, and I thought, this is the most beautiful car. And it's sort of maybe in the same realm as a Bentley Mark VI drop head coupe. It's maybe a notch below that in its original price and so forth. But Daimler built some really, really ugly cars in the post-war era, which probably is what led to their demise. But this car, designed by Hooper, it's a beautiful design, in my opinion, in that sort of dignified British way. And there were only 6 built in this body style. The first one was built for, I believe it was for King George, and who I believe passed away shortly after delivery. And this is not King George's car, but it's still a beautiful car. It's in excellent colors. It had a 5-year restoration, which I think was completed about 2018. And I think when people see it, they're going to be very surprised at what a really outstanding car this is. Now, Daimlers are not that well known in the U.S. This is a right-hand drive car, so it could go back to England. But I think it is well worth its $125,000 to $175,000 estimate.
Yeah, that's a lot of car for that price, certainly. And you're right. I mean, they've been very hit or miss. You think it's about some of the 50s cars that they had that look like missiles with fins on the back and that type of stuff. Not the most beautiful cars in the world, but they were also a high luxury mark. So they certainly have produced some beautiful cars over their history as well.
Right. I think this is a sleeper and may surprise us at how high this one goes.
It's always fun to talk oddities, and there's a few in Amelia Island as well that are extremely intriguing. Right from the top, we've got a 1970 Austin Mini Cooper S Mark II police car. I've got a thing for Mini Coopers, and I got a thing for police cars, and this thing is both. It's a broad arrow grip, $40,000 to $50,000, and it's actually a real police car. Originally ordered March of 1970 by the Liverpool and Bootle Constable for use with the Liverpool Police Force. It's just one of 8 surviving examples from the order that's the original order of 27 that the Liverpool police did in 1970. Full English restoration. It approximately cost $30,000 to put this thing back together, and it was just acquired by the current owner in 2019. Incredibly charming, well preserved S Mark II from a collection of somebody who is a self-described mini aficionado. I don't even know what to say about this. I want it. What do you think?
It's got a low estimate. I think somebody will, a mini lover will be happy to pony up some money along that line for this car. Imagine Americans, using a mini as a police car. It's, pretty unlikely. 2 or 3 years ago at, RM Hershey, there was an MGA police car, and even more ridiculous by American standards. And it was an actual real police car. And, I don't remember what the price that it sold for was, but it sold pretty strongly. I think this is a, interesting pick. I think if it's no reserve, and I think it'll sell it easily, of course, but, I think the, estimate's probably right on.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. It's miles of smiles on this one for sure. And I think maybe the purpose of an MGA police car would be a deterrent almost. If you get arrested in the MGA police car, what do? Strap you to the hood or put you in the trunk or something? Like, the trip to jail in that thing is probably not a good time.
Well, it's evident that the British have a totally different conception of police cars than we do.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun for sure.
I don't think you'll see a Crown Victoria at the Wrought Arrow auction anytime soon. I have 2 oddities, if I can mention 2. One's a very unserious car and one's a very serious car. The unserious car is a Bonhams car, the 1985 Modena Spider. And this is the Ferris Bueller's Day Off car. And there were, I believe it was 5 that were built for filming the movie. And if anyone hasn't seen that movie, you must go see it because it's one of the greatest American movies, I think.
My favorite movie of all time, probably that or the remake of Gone in 60 Seconds were probably my 2 favorite movies.
All right. Well, it's a great movie. And so this was supposed to stand in to be a 250 GT California. And I believe it's a purpose-built chassis, and it has a Ford 302 engine. So it's basically probably nothing particularly special from the car point of view, but as a cultural icon, it's fabulous. And I think movie lovers would love to have this car. I actually didn't write down the estimate, but I think it was around 250 to 350. I think this is one that's pretty unpredictable. And it depends on who's in the room and how much they love Ferris Bueller's Day Off and how much money they have. So I think that's an unpredictable one. The serious car, very serious car, is RM's 1934 Tatra T77. And probably most of our viewers know that the Tatra was a Czech car, famous for its rear engine V8, small V8's rear engine. And so this car was incredibly advanced for its time. It's highly aerodynamic. We had the DeSoto and Chrysler Airflows, which were quite radical for their time here in the U.S., but this goes several steps beyond that. Apparently there are only 5 survivors of this model worldwide. And this particular car, you really need to go to the website and look at it. It's got it was restoration, that cost in excess of $1 million. according to the description. Oddly, when I look at the website, there's no estimate there. I think it's a typo or something, but, so I have no idea what this car is going to sell for. I mean, how many Tetra T77s do we see at auctions? So I think this is another one that's kind of a wild card, and, I'll be interested to see its fate.
They're interesting cars. They were a featured market at the Pebble Beach Concours a few years ago, and I think that maybe educated a lot of people on those vehicles. But they are certainly unique and certainly special. Something else incredibly special that, in my opinion, is a home run of a investment from this standpoint. I'll tell you right now, I'm a big motorcycle guy, and one of the things I've noticed is the motorcycle market tends to sort of follow the collector car market, but a few years behind. So it's pretty easy to predict motorcycles and what they're going to do, what's going to be trendy there, and so on and so forth. Right now in that market, what's really popular is racing bikes from the 40s and 50s and so on and so forth. But in my opinion, this is the one to get right now. This is over at Gurney Eagle Company. They've got a series of wonderful Italian motorcycles. This is a 1974 Ducati 750 Super Sport. Estimate on this with no reserve is 125 to 175. It's one of just 401 examples built and one of just 88 imported to the United States. It's believed to be one of only 20 unrestored Super Sports remaining. It's a remarkably low mileage example with just under 8,000 kilometers at the time of cataloging. Been documented by all the marque experts. And it's most certainly one of the finest unrestored examples of what is going to be probably the world's most desirable motorcycle. The reason I say this is I'm pretty convinced that this is the Ferrari GTO motorcycle. You kind of think about sort of how the market has moved and between those two time periods and what you could buy a GTO for several years ago. This is going to be a similar increase in value, in my opinion. Also worth mentioning, they have a regular Ducati. I shouldn't call it regular. There's no such thing as a regular Ducati Super Sport, but they have a 750 Ducati Sport, which is a little bit more usable, a little less expensive. So if you want to drive something super exotic, that's there as well. In addition, they also have a 1971 Milanka Testarossa. I have one of these in my collection, and I got to say, it's absolutely fabulous. Not a lot you can do with it on the road, but you put it in your living room, and it'll give you a big, giant smile every single time you walk by it. Okay, Jeff, you've been doing this a long time. You're a very respected analyst for Sports Car Market Magazine. So let's talk buy, sell, hold. But before we do that, overall Amelia Island Car Week market predictions. Like, what do you think Amelia Island's going to return overall? Where do you think we're going to be in a week when this is over? What do you see for the marketplace transitioning from Amelia Island and then on into Monterey?
Well, consistent with what we discussed earlier, I think the market will remain strong. Maybe we'll be surprised, but I pretty much doubt it. And I think the strengths of the market will hold here at Amelia and probably continue on to Monterey. Now, Monterey's not till August. You know, there's many people are still predicting what would probably be a fairly mild recession. That might have some impact. But I basically think the strengths of the market are going to continue.
So what are we going to buy? What are we going to sell? And what are we going to hold?
Well, one buy area that maybe is less than obvious is I think 70s into 80s Aston Martins have some room for appreciation. To me, buy cars are cars that are they're not going to be this cheap again, probably. And I think so. Starting with say the DBS 6-cylinder, which I believe came out in '69. And then they evolved into the V8s in the 80s. I mean, these are expensive cars to maintain, so one should not buy one lightly. One should only buy a good one. But I think that they are tremendous performers. I think they have a lot of charm. I think the style, which was maybe initially thought to be not quite as outstanding as the DB456, but I think they now really have a style of their own, which is very, very distinctive and attractive. This one is maybe a little more obvious. I think Japanese sports cars still have a way to appreciate, particularly maybe the second tier ones that haven't already appreciated tremendously, like Toyota Supras or Nissan Skylines, which have already really gone up tremendously. But maybe second tier Japanese sports cars like, say, early Toyota MR2s, even things, tiny little cars like Honda S800s, even Datsun Roadsters, pre-Datsun Z's, Datsun Roadsters. I think there's still definitely room for appreciation on those. Of course, that's at a lower level than the Aston Martins. Sales, there's two classes of cars that I think were weak and declining, and then kind of had a bit of a kick up during the pandemic, crazy time. And they were small British sports cars. I just don't see that young people are ever going to be interested in Triumph TR3s, for example. They're neat cars, but I don't really see too much of a feature, for them. So, if you have one and you might want to say, I'll never get this much money for it again, so I'm going to, sell it. And the other one might be that also showed some straits in the pandemic market after some time of decline, were what I'll call non-rare muscle cars. So kind of your everyday forerunners, your everyday, road runners and, GTOs, a 389 2-barrel automatic or something like that. Great car to own, have a lot of fun with it, but I don't see them increasing in value. In holds, cars to hold would be, to me, our entry-level Porsches, 914s, 944s, maybe 968s, which I think still have room to appreciate. That, they're never going to be $1 million cars. I think there's definitely room for those to appreciate. I think young people who are interested in Japanese sports cars could also be interested in those. And I think they've definitely got room for appreciation for good ones. And then rare muscle cars, like, for instance, if you had a GTO Judge Ram Air 4, I don't think those are the rare ones, or, Hemi Cudas. I don't see them going down too much. They may not appreciate a whole lot more. They've been pretty strong lately after a period of decline, but I don't really see them going down too much. So if you have one, I don't think you're at much risk of the value greatly declining.
I got to tell you, I really agree with you on those Aston Martins. I think those are just under the radar completely and have nowhere to go but up. And they are fabulous cars to drive. They're loud and visceral, but they're comfortable and luxurious, and they look cool. Like, they're really, really a neat vehicle. So I definitely think that's a great buy suggestion. I would like to thank my guest, Jeff Trepel, for joining us today. To learn more about anything that we discussed here, be sure to pick up the latest issue of Sports Car Market Magazine by visiting the link in the video description down below. As a reminder, if you enjoyed this content, please take a moment to like and share this video, and don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon to stay on top of future episodes. I'm Darin Roberge, and thank you for joining us on the Buy, Sell, Hold Spotlight.